bonjour.
Good morning. Thank you for having joined us for this session, which is really a very hot topic. Energy, geostrategic supply. And we will be talking about the States, China, oil, gas, nuclear. And to debate on this, I have the pleasure on my right to have Zofia WETMANSKA. You are Vice President of the Reform Institute. And you will be talking to us about European energy policies and the way in which we can reduce our dependency. To your right, we have Nicolas MAES. You are Director of ORANO, and you're going to be talking about fuel sites and how can we increase our independency. What are the assets of France? Xavier, PIECHACYK, you are Director of RTE, and we will be talking about the grid and the necessary transformation, 100 million investment by 2040. And Brigham, you come from the other side of the Atlantic. You are a researcher and main director of the Hudson Institute. You're a pure product of the Cold War to some extent, because your institute was founded in 1961 by former rent population members. And I think Raymond Arnaud participated in your works. And I think that you even had an office in Paris a long time ago. So to present the challenges of this roundtable, Valérie, you're economist and member of this Cercle. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Patrice, and good afternoon, everybody. So the war in Ukraine has brutally reminded us of a reality that we had somewhat neglected, and that is that energy is not merely an economic resource, it's also a geopolitical weapon. And the energy supply now is a stake of national security. So for a long time, we considered energy as a technical or logistics question. But it's also a strategic lever, and it guarantees our sovereignty, and it's a source of dependency. So let's take an example that we're very familiar with, that of Russian gas. For years, Europe relied upon these cheap imports with the idea that trade would contribute to the stability of the relationship. Whereas you all know, as soon as the Russia-Ukrainian war broke out, this dependence turned around and hit the Europeans back in the face. Deliveries were suspended, prices soared, and the energy question became a political emergency. And this situation goes well beyond the only framework of Russian gas. For example, we could mention oil from the Middle East, liquid natural gas in Qatar, or critical materials that are extracted, mined in China or in the RDC, for example. So most industrial states are structurally dependent on resources that are geographically concentrated. And this concentration accentuates market volatility and feeds international tension. The switch to a low-carbon economy does not escape this process. You're also aware that batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles require lithium, cobalt, rare minerals, etc., meaning raw materials that are at the heart of long supply chains that are vulnerable and often controlled by a small number of players. Therefore, the energy transition is, of course, not a synonym of energy sovereignty. In other words, by pulling out of fossil fuels, we're not removing this dependency. We're just changing the type of dependency. So therefore, what are the possible avenues to rise and meet this challenge, that of our energy supply? There are a number. The first is diversification. What does it mean? It means that we must diversify our sources of energy, our suppliers, and also our technologies. And we shouldn't place all our bets on a single solution, even though it might be renewable. The second possibility is to develop renewable energies. The advantage is that these can be produced, partially at least, locally, which reduces exposure to international tension. But of course, this is not enough to guarantee the strategic autonomy, because we would need to be able to control the entire value chain, meaning, for example, mining, refining, production, recycling, etc. A third possibility would consist in investing in storage and energy efficiency. It's not enough, as you know. To produce energy, we must also be able to store it, to transport it, and use it intelligently. What does this mean? Well, it means modern grids, performant batteries, buildings that consume less energy, decarbonated transport, etc. And all of this comes at a cost, or costs, financial, of course, technological, but also diplomatic. To achieve a form of energy autonomy requires time, coordination, strategic alliances, and therefore an approach that is deeply geopolitical. And this is the core challenge. Total energy sovereignty, we will debate about this, but total energy sovereignty is unattainable. No country will be able to produce alone, all the time, everything that they need. But strategic autonomy that is consolidated, it might be possible. What does this mean? It means depending less, depending better, but above all, depending on chosen partners who are reliable and who we choose within the framework of balanced alliances. So in all, the energy question can no longer be dissociated from geopolitical global balances. It is at the heart of industrial policy, climate commitments, and our collective security. So it requires a deep-rooted shift in paradigm, meaning we must move from a process of short-term flow management to a true resilience long-term strategy. So we will be debating about all of this today with our four speakers, who we're delighted to welcome. Patrice, thank you, Valérie. Thank you above all from illustrating the complex nature of these energy challenges. So, Brigham and MCCOWN, how do the United States see these challenges of sovereignty? Europe has placed the accent on carbon neutrality. There was the major IRA program by Biden on renewables, and then there was the turnaround of Donald Trump. How can we understand the energy strategy of the States today?
My apologies. I need to speak in English because you would not want to hear my French. My wife says I sound more like an Italian, so let me leave it there. But just on the outset, thank you so much to the organizers, to the city, to our expert moderator, fellow panel members, and to you ladies and gentlemen in the audience. I'd be remiss if I did not remark by saying today in America we are celebrating our birthday, and that is due in large part to France and Lafayette, who, without whom, as a naval man, I can tell you, without whom that would not have made it possible. So, and on the notice of the transatlantic relations, we've heard some people say it's great. We've heard some people it's, well, you have a word for that, and it's going to get worse. Let me just say that if any of you and your family have a family where nobody quarrels, where there is no argument or no differences of opinion, please let me know, because I would like to be adopted by your family. But in all seriousness, we have undergone this shift from the Biden administration to the Trump administration, and America is divided on energy. What I can tell you is both the Republicans and the Democrats are trying to understand what is the definition of energy security, and that's something that I study a lot at Hudson. And really, it's the intersection of having energy that is available, it is accessible meaning reliable, and it is affordable. And I think if we look at the post-Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and we look at what happened to Germany, and we looked at what happened to Europe as a whole with the energy crisis, we can see that, to your point, diversification is really critically important. And while we do want to move toward a lower carbon energy mix, that affordability piece keeps popping back out. And America passed the the Inflation Reduction Act under President Biden, which had nothing to do with inflation, by the way. It was just spending a lot of money, and it gave a lot of money to everybody, including the green industry. It was at the time heavily criticized in Europe as a give out to green technology, unfair. Now President Trump has come back and said, stop giving out money to anybody. If you make it, you make it. If you don't make it, you don't make it. It is fair. He has called the Green New Deal the green energy scam. I think the truth always lies somewhere in between the extremes. And America is in a bit of a different position because of the abundance of oil and natural gas, which for us has been a godsend considering the Middle East crisis of the 70s, the dependencies that many other countries face. But the takeaway from this is that the world will only continue to use more energy, not less. That has been our point to this juncture. Maybe someday energy is so efficient we use less, maybe the population stabilizes, but for the foreseeable future it uses more. And the great news is that over the last several years we've deployed more renewable energy than ever before. In 2024, I think it was 3.7, I keep wanting to say gigawatts. I saw that movie the other day. Exajoules of energy. But that was only half of the energy growth across the world. The other half still coming from fossil fuels, which are still 87% of what the world uses. So the question is, how do we responsibly develop energy at a reliable cost without deindustrialization of our own economies, while diversifying the supply chain, as has been pointed out by Valérie? And how can we do that in a way that lessens our dependence on individual countries?
Merci beaucoup. Donc une énergie.
Thank you very much. Therefore, available energy at a reasonable cost, even if we have to not do away with, but maybe defer investments in the fight against climate change and carbon neutrality, considering the economic climate. So I turn now to you, Nicolas MAES. You are director of ORANO. France, for a long time, has been very proud of its nuclear industry and then went into a series of hesitations on this subject. Close certain reactors, and now there's a regain of nuclear. On the fuel side, how can France guarantee this supply and its energy sovereignty? Can you explain this to us? You have 5 or 6 minutes. Yes, maybe just to come back to the fact that nuclear, by essence, is an energy that has a geostrategic influence. Geostrategically, there can be no decarbonated energy without a mix that is based on renewables. And if you're not lucky enough to have hydraulic energy, it requires nuclear energy. In a historic and diplomatic point of view, civil nuclear energy was born in the UN in 1953 with Eisenhower's speech for peace, and then with the Euratom Treaty, one of the essential treaties of the European Union. So from a financial point of view, the challenge recently has been to fund the major multilateral financial institutions were refusing to fund nuclear energy for the past 15 years, and then the European Investment Bank with a loan of 400 billion euros, and then the World Bank have removed these blockages and have come back to funding nuclear energy. But it's a very multilateral approach. So in nuclear energy, of course, there are the reactors that we talk of all the time, EPRs, and then we talk about startups. So the reactor is just one of the legs. The second leg is the fuel that we use for these reactors, which is sometimes the thing that we forget about in the subject. All of the development of nuclear startups have talked a lot about their reactors, but most of them actually work on a chain of fuel that doesn't yet exist today, and which restricts the reality of actually coming coming to the market, but we're working hard with them in order to develop this. Then on the fuel cycle, what are we talking about? We're talking about the supply of uranium, its transformation, and then the processing of end-of-life fuels. So the supply of uranium is what we talk about most. And there are two realities here because it's a raw material. One of them has a geological reality. And the good news there is that there is uranium everywhere. It is a natural element on Earth, and it exists everywhere, even in seawater. Of course, there can't be mines everywhere because there must be concentration mechanisms. But once again, good news, there is uranium everywhere in the world. And now you have mines that are being operated in Kazakhstan, Australia, Africa, Australia, Canada, United States. And of course, I'm being a bit lengthy, but it's to show you that it's really everywhere. And in the countries that I listed, there are countries of the OCDE. And not only. So there are geographic realities everywhere. And a geopolitical reality is that even though it is omnipresent, there are alliances to be forged because a lot of countries that use nuclear don't have large amounts of uranium in their country, and therefore, through diversification and alliances, they need to secure their supplies. But uranium is not really the subject. The subject is autonomy and sovereignty in the fuel cycle is the subsequent stages of transformation which allow us to purify this uranium and then to enrich it. And these steps call upon technologies that are not very widespread, and they're highly concentrated and highly monitored and regulated because these technologies can have a dual use. Meaning if you use it to create energy, that's good, but you can also use it for far less honorable ends. So we've all become specialists of this with the recent bombings in Iran. And this transformation step for many industrial sectors is not the one that we're talking about, but it's the one that is key. If you make a parallel with rare minerals, they're not rare, actually. There are sources of rare minerals everywhere in the world, but the processing is very concentrated. 98% is in China. Uranium is not a rare matter, but its transformation is somewhat concentrated. The good news is that most of it is done in France, and when we say that France, therefore, is autonomous and sovereign in its energy field, it's because they control these manufacturing stages. In the long term, you might say, what if uranium one day came to be scarce, or if the polarization of the world meant that the access to uranium would become more difficult? What would we do? And it's true, that's why in the long term it's important to place our bets on technologies of processing and recycling of nuclear fuels. This is a reality that already exists in France. It's been a long-term choice in France. Today, 1 light bulb out of 10 in France is lit up with recycled nuclear fuel that has been removed from the plants, reprocessed and put back in. So this is due to the historical choices of France. This is also a historical choice of Russia and the choice that China is heading for also. It's also a choice made by Japan. I've cited all of the big nuclear powers except for one. And the United States, where it was taboo for a long time, then it went to, it's no longer taboo, but it's not our doctrine. And in Trump's executive orders that were signed in May, Trump said the United States will restudy processing and recycling and no doubt start processing and recycling. So to conclude, we understand the geostrategic dimension, the choices made by the countries. France, and through France, Europe, is incredibly lucky because France has one of the 2 only companies in the world that controls all of this technology. This company is called ORANO, and I have the honor of managing this company. The second company is Rosato, but it's the Russians. So if we're the only company in the Western world to control all of these technologies, it means that we have a real asset for our country, but no doubt also a good means to forge links with a certain number of other powers, and in particular the United States, who do not harness some of these technologies. Thank you, Nicolas Mess. I turn to you, Xavier PIECHACYK, because you're president of the board of RTE. You are in charge of this transition also, because with high voltage lines, you're in the heart of a tremendous program of modernization of the high voltage grid with a program of 100 million euros of investment by 2040. And there again, no doubt, we need all of the necessary material. You will be explaining how you see this subject. Yes, so I would like to react to what Madam said about when she said that when we were to go through this transition, we would go from one dependency to another. I don't entirely agree with that, because these questions of independence or sovereignty are often questions of intensity. We're not in a world where everything is black and white. We know that doesn't exist. Our dependency in Europe of very high intensity is our dependence on oil and gas. France, which is a country that consumes comparatively little gas and little electricity compared to its neighbors, is still dependent to the extent of 60% for the energy that it uses. This is raw materials, therefore oil and gas, that we do not mine in Europe, a little bit of gas in the north, and that is what makes us dependent. And so, of course, the tradition can create others, but there are questions of proportions which we must bear in mind. Having said this, to move away from oil and gas for economic questions, for climate questions, and also questions of sovereignty means electrifying, and therefore you need a grid. I just want to say how RTE, because as you said, I'm in charge of this big investment plan, how we're taking on board this question of sovereignty. We have three different angles. The first is the sovereignty of raw materials, and that's mostly metal. Where does metal come from? If we have time, we'll say a word on how we recycle it. And I agree with my neighbor. Rare metals we talk a lot about, but what is critical is not the sources, it's the way in which we process them. So that's what we're concerned with. Then we also look at technological sovereignty. When you're a critical operator, as we are, the technologies that we deploy on the grid, we must understand them and we must harness them. For example, if we put SE in open source, it's better than to put SE, which is a black box. It's valid for standard SE, also for AI. And we have launched an initiative on the list of the digital resilience of companies, where everyone is looking at how far they're exposed around these digital issues. So we must harness the technologies that we use in our country, whether we manufacture them or not. It's better to manufacture them. And the third sovereignty that we are seeking to attain is manufacturing sovereignty, where the factor is to manufacture the equipment that we set up in Europe. Of course, if they're in Europe, it's better, for a very good reason, because you can't switch off the tap. And that's important. It's a sovereignty that we don't often talk about. We might think that, of the world as a world plant, but it is a considerable means of pressure when the manufacturing is concentrated on one continent or another. So these are our three different angles for measuring our different interdependencies and our sovereignty. And it's a question of national protection. It's a question of sovereignty. Of course, if we have the opportunity, we will say a word about how we deal with each of these sovereign aspects. Raw materials, tech, and manufacturing. Where are the plants? Thank you very much, Zofia WETMANSKA. You're co-president of the Reform Unit Institute. You're from Poland. Europe has just decided in May to limit dependency on Russian gas. The idea is to no longer depend on Russian gas by the end of 2027. To no longer have any oil coming through the Russian phantom fleet, and also to limit the number of supply contracts with Russia for nuclear. Is this the right avenue? Is it possible, above all? Can we achieve this?
Thank you so much for having me. As you said, I come from Poland, so I'll offer as much of optimism as I can, but there are limits to that. I do think that's possible still, and I think if you were having a conversation on energy security 10 years ago, Poland would boast and be proud of its success in diversifying natural gas supplies through Baltic Pipe, through LNG terminals and so on. And that was actually the first time where, or maybe not very rare time, where we actually prioritized long-term outcomes over the short-term gains. And so that is very much a success, I do agree. But it was an answer that provided solutions just in time for the crisis caused by Russian war in Ukraine. But it's no longer a solution for the upcoming issues with energy security. So that possibility can only be achieved, the outlook of energy security in 2030s or 2040s can only be accessed or achieved through diversification of energy sources and reduction of over-reliance on supplies of fossil fuels and investments in diversification. And we've heard that's difficult, that has its own problems, but when you do the cost-benefit analysis, the costs of reliance on fossil fuels are much harder and much more expensive than the costs that reliance on renewables and diversified energy mix can be associated with. So it's very much about cost-benefit analysis and that trust in the long-term sustainability and the resilience rather than short-term outcomes. And I'm going to repeat some of the aspects because I'm going to focus on the policy aspect, given that I run the think tank. Yes, renewable energy deployment, we've heard that from almost everyone, if not everyone, but that is associated with policies such as streamlining the permitting process, right? So if you think about it, in Poland, you cannot really deploy renewables if you were to do it tomorrow, right? Any decisions that are happening today provide the outlook of new gigawatts coming into the system in 2030. So it's not the tomorrow we're thinking about, but it's another decade that is realistic. So that permitting process and the permitting process that the EU focused on in the Repower EU, so the plan that you've mentioned is part of the Repower EU. So part of that decarbonization as an answer to the crisis. So that is very much a priority across the Europe. It's not only Poland, but it's across the Europe. Another one would be grid infrastructure. We already heard about the grids. It is, again, a very common problem across the Europe. In Poland, almost 7,000 requests for joining the grid were declined in 2023. It is about 80, theoretical 80 gigawatts. So we are losing opportunities because the investments in grid didn't catch up with the pace of change that has happened or is possible to happen. So policy solutions like that can help us speed the process. And then I think we haven't mentioned that too much in this discussion is the energy efficiency. So what I'm saying, and energy efficiency and sort of decreasing the demand for energy as such. So not only the standards for buildings or industry, but also policies such as very controversial at the EU level, ETS2 system. That is the way that EU introduces or aims to introduce disincentivize the extensive use of fossil fuels. So there are a number of investments and policy directions that you can use to make the goal of energy security possible. And however, you also, apart from the policies that target the energy efficiency, the renewable deployment, you also need that infrastructure. There was quite a lot about technologies already mentioned in our dialogue, but I think we haven't named the Clean Industrial Deal as one of the levers for that decarbonization process and for these technologies, so such as tax incentives, subsidies, and any support for infrastructure to help us mainstream solar panels, batteries, heat pumps, and so on. So that Clean Industrial Deal as a policy is a major lever if deployed at the national level very efficiently. So this is also not at the Commission's level, but at the member states level to actually implement it in a manner that helps to benefit in right benefits. And I think last or final message in that sort of context is the strategic alliances. It's not only about the alliances with the trusted partners, it's also the understanding that for a long time, member states prioritize their own benefits, and there will always be incentives to do bilateral deals with China when it comes to technology or any other sort of bilateral decisions. But as soon as we realize that if we prioritize the European angle, the national benefits can be scaled much further, that's going to bring us further. And I think recent announcement of, for example, clean technology hub that has been set by the EU, so the similar manner of thinking as it was about gas, right? So the common gas purchases, European gas purchases, it's going to be about technologies now. So establishing those partnerships, establishing cooperation across the EU, but also with third parties as a European Union, not individual states, that could help us mainstream the transition process and get us to that realistic energy security that we so dream about.
Merci Zofia WETMANSKA.
Thank you. I would like to launch a debate because you have mentioned the issue of energy efficiency, and I turn towards you, Xavier PIECHACYK. You have Anne Le Vergeon said that nuclear plants could produce more energy in a more efficient manner. Is it something that you would confirm or not? Could we do better on that level? What does RTE say on that? I would give the floor to Nicolas on the nuclear energy aspect, but we say what we write. The nuclear energy park produces 360 tetra-hour, and the objective is to generate 400. There's no controversy on what we produce right now. It's 400 tetra-hour per year. We have had a phenomenon of corrosion under constraint, which is quite complicated. We're trying to solve the problem. Do you share that analysis, Xavier? I'm not going to comment on the book of Mrs. Le Vergeon, if you allow me, but the objective of 400 terawatt-hour has been reconfirmed by Mr. Fontana, who was confirmed as the president of EDF. He was crystal clear, it was the objective. And the second thing that I would like to say is that we have to be very to be careful about comparisons, because this could be managed in a different way if you manage it in a way where you just insure just a small part of the electricity and you do it for modulations, which is not always the case when it's a small share of the electricity at large. What about energy supply? Can you talk about this?
Briefly, we can always increase efficiency, and we should always attempt to do that with new sources of products that we purchase and re-insulation, but you cannot save your way to energy prosperity. Energy prosperity, energy abundance equals economic prosperity, equals economic abundance. It is that critical ingredient along with the cost of people and material that makes you competitive in the world. Energy scarcity brings energy poverty. And so again, my caution is we can't save our way to nirvana, but we need more energy, and I think nuclear is a fantastic option.
Thank you. Zofia WETMANSKA.
Maybe just quickly to add to that affordability aspect, there's also, again, policy angle to that on the redistribution aspect. So we do have, as European Union member states, ETS revenues that could, if well planned, could be spent to support vulnerable groups and vulnerable parts of society to redistribute the effects of the climate policy. So that energy efficiency measures that would be costly for some could be sort of mitigated through the appropriate policy measures, redistributional measures that member states do need to implement, and the EU is awaiting the social climate plans from the beneficiaries of the Social Climate Fund.
Thank you. Maintenant, allons un peu plus loin sur la question des dépendances ou des
Something else about interdependency and dependency. We talked about uranium and the difficulties found in Africa. You have highlighted that there was uranium everywhere in the world. What about the countries where you could bet to secure a French supply. Today, we have been involved in Canada and Kazakhstan. We were in Niger, and that you've seen that we are in a very sensitive situation now, and to the point that we have reached international arbitrage. You have noticed that, as opposed to what the press could say, France has not found itself in with a blackout, and the electricity price didn't soar because of what happened in Niger, and it accounted for 3% of the world uranium. So it's a matter of balance of supply and demand as a side event, but also it's a real difficulty for our people there. Today, we are in a program of to develop in Uzbekistan and Mongolia, but also in Canada. And we have also exploration activities in Mongolia, again, in Canada in a significant way. And we are also thinking about relaunching exploration in other countries of the world. So you try to diversify the supply chain in different areas of the world. Yes, not to depend on one single area. And this is our objective. What you have to understand about France is that the security of supply does not depend on ORANO only. We sell approximately 50% of our uranium to EDF, but we sell uranium, 50% of this, to Japan, to Korea, to America. And EDF, it will be up to tell them, but 50% of their needs are secured with us. That means that they outsources their needs to in the ballpark of 50% to someone else, which is a good thing, because they could buy from Australia, from Namibia, in countries where we are not. That means that France depends on dozens of countries where we are involved only in 4 or 5 countries. So you were talking about enriched uranium. We still depend on Russia. What could be done to curb, to phase out of Russian uranium? Well, it depends when you say we. Well, France doesn't depend on Russia for enriched uranium. We have enough on our territory to feed 90 million of households, so that's a lot. But if we know US and all Europe, well, if we, when we talk about we, it's Europe and US, 30% of enriched uranium comes from Russia, and there's no substitution capacity as to this Russian supply. This is why civil uranium is not under sanctions, because there's no alternative, as opposed to oil, because we can buy it elsewhere. This is our commitment, is to increase our capacities in Europe and in the US. We have launched an investment on Tricastin site in the Vallée du Rhône to increase by 30% our capacity. It's a 1.7 billion investment authorized by the Board of Directors in 2023, and that will produce the first turbines in mid-2028, and we will have the opportunity to have an enrichment plant in the US to replace the Russians. So there's no commercial contract with Rosatom nowadays for ORANO. No, ORANO has no contract with Rosatom. ORANO doesn't buy enriched uranium for itself. It's electricians that buy it, actually. No, ORANO, we have no connection whatsoever with Rosatom. So what about dependency on Russia? There was a 2024 act that provided to phase out of this dependency. What are you going to do to not to depend on Russia anymore on that subject?
Thank you for the question. Very quickly, we have to stand back up our own enrichment facilities, which were vast and large, but very inefficient by today's standards. And they were shut down as part of the post-Cold War dividend, where we actually purchased highly enriched uranium from Russia to get that weapons-grade material out of the country. But this was a dependency that we created. Canada has announced it wishes to become a world superpower of energy, and that includes the ability to mine uranium, and then the U.S. needs to invest heavily in centrifuges and additional capacity. But maybe you can come save us from ourselves in this regard?
That's what we'll actually do. And notre projet.
Our project, I'm going back to French, Our project is AIK, is like hike as an hour. And if it becomes a reality, it will be on the Oak Ridge site in Tennessee. Xavier PIECHACYK, about the matter of metals that are necessary for all these high voltage cables. Can you delve into the subject and talk further about the program that you have launched or that you're about to launch? Yes. I wanted to refer to that informally before. We often talk about rare earth elements, because when we talk about the global cost of energy transformation and electrification of Europe and France, we see that often we have metals that could become critical and that are daily metals. That's the copper and uranium. We do not harness it enough. We do not extract it in Europe. We produce it, however. But we have launched diversification operations. This is what we're discussing with our suppliers to know where it comes from. And we have a recycling program. But we don't have natural resources of raw materials, not enough, actually. And what we try to do is to recycle a maximum of that. And what we try to do is to do that with cables, to insert in cables that we buy a part of recycled metal from our previous cables. And it's not that easy from a technical point of view, because to transport electricity, we need to have pure metals. And so from an industrial point of view, it's quite complex. We stand at 10% right now. The objective is to reach 30%. It's also this way, and with the diversification of rare earths and metals, that we can become independent. And I'm going to go back to what we said earlier. Independence, it's a matter of diversification, but also intensity. What we're looking for is to try a way to have low intensity of this potential dependencies. In France or in Europe, do we have industrialists that are looking to enter this new market of recycled metals? Is that a sector that we should develop? Yes. I'm going to mention them. Trimet in France. It's in MOYON. So we work with Trimet. We work with Nexans. We involve also French industrialists, but also we do so because I have the conviction that this energy transition cannot be done without efforts. And this energy transition will generate a lot of investments. And that will boost growth for France. And what is invested on the French territory should generate jobs in France. If I invest on other transport electricity carriers, it needs to generate jobs in France. So as a counterpart, what we have to set up, this is an economic, political and social counterpart, but it's also a way to deal and address our sovereignty issues. So it's two birds with one stone, and it's a good thing. So we set ourselves objectives in terms of supply, of facilities and equipment, and for 100 billion of investments, you can imagine that it's a lot at stake. So in Europe, 100%, and in France, above 50%. So 100 billion euros, that will be costly for the consumer in France, won't it? Well, these are amortized and depreciated over time. No, it won't cost that much because the networks are not prevailing in the bill, in the electricity bill, but this is something that is pooled for all consumers and producers. So we're not going to have cables pulled out of pure pleasure. What we want to do is to have an efficient business model that is optimized from an economic point of view, so that we do not have too high a cost and that it's not a burden for the consumers. As for the transition, it will take more space on the bill, but we will be able to optimize the production to try to reduce the share of production. I'm going to give you a small example. We do, when we do renewable energy, we have to have flexibility, and the production cost decreases because it's not that hard to build
but this will have a cost on the grid. So this is how we balance out. Mr. WETMANSKA, what about recycling? Do we need to do recycling for energy? Should it be a priority to support industrial programs? Is that already the case?
And just to come back to what was just said about the recycling of rare elements, that is very much in line with what CID, so the Clean Industrial Deal proposed by Commission, is proposing as one of the sources of rare elements. And what is happening in France is very much ahead of what's happening in the rest part of Europe. So there's definitely lessons to be learned and knowledge transfer to happen, because very rarely circular economy approach has been used to increase the sources or to diversify the sources as of yet. So I think that's an important angle of that discussion. And coming back to the question to the energy recycling, so essentially the efficiency of the processes, and that basically plays its part for the industry and hard to abate sectors at the largest scale. So undoubtedly, if we are to continue that competitive approach towards decarbonization, that is one of the types of technologies as such that we cannot really overlook in the transition. So firstly, the circular geopolitical dimension of circular economy suddenly is being integrated into the discussion, which has not happened earlier, and now and the energy efficiency aspect is also at the industrial level cannot be overlooked, I'd say.
Merci.
Thank you. Brigham, we saw the tug of war between President Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky on the question of mine resources, and they tried to force and compel Zelensky to get the mines. So are these resources so strategic? First question. And from the viewpoint of Europe, could we consider that the US is still an ally of Europe?
Let me say, I think that the United States is still an ally of Europe, as I started off this morning, or talking earlier at the beginning of the conference. And while this is an interesting moment for U.S.-European relations, I think we will move beyond this. I think, you know, when you look at President Trump, you can't hinge on the first thing he says, which is, I want you to cut your arms off, or I want you to whatever. That's part of the negotiating tactic. It's not very diplomatic. I get that. What is important is to where the conversation eventually ends up. And the U.S. and Ukraine did end up signing a critical minerals agreement. But yeah, that was quite a day in the Oval Office, and Mr. Zelensky was supposed to come to Hudson to deliver a keynote after that, which we decided not to fan the flames anymore that day and to wait for another day. So that is unfortunate. But critical minerals, rare earth materials, you know, they are important. They are extremely important for the energy transition. They're important for the materials that we made. I've heard about the F-35. You cannot make it without critical materials. And most of these are concentrated in certain areas that are, shall we say, less than democratic. So that is something where Western unity would be very helpful in not only being able to mine these materials, but to process them, which is really the more important aspect, which has been alluded to today.
Merci.
Thank you. We are in Europe. The energy market is not a national matter. Xavier PIECHACYK on the matter of interconnection of grids. Is it a way also to secure our supply? Is it an opportunity for the consumer? Is it an upside? Yes, it is, because it's the first source of flexibility, the first element that allows us to manage and address peak hours and down hours. So we can exchange energy so as to have a bigger base and to make all our grids flexible And it's a good way to do that. It's a good thing to do that. We could also have industrial incidents, and France has, in 22-23, has gone through an electric crisis with the corrosion under constraint period. During that winter, we imported a lot of energy. The rest of the time, France is a country that generates an electricity of high quality, thanks to nuclear energy first. It's affordable, it's decarbonated. So France tends to supply Europe with electricity that is carbon-free. That's good news. That's good news for the climate, because the one that we produce at home and that we export, it's a lot of gas and coal plants that do not, that are not active elsewhere. It's a good thing for sovereignty, because this is something that we generate on our territory, and something else that we haven't talked about. It's a piece of news for the climate, because when we generate nuclear energy or renewable electricity and we export it, 90 terawatt-hour, it's significant, it's carbon-free, and it decarbonates all Europe. Do you want to say something, Mrs. WETMANSKA, on that subject?
Just wanted to add that another sort of source of flexibility, or rather a solution towards that energy security, is not only reliance on other European countries, but also reliance on a decentralized energy system. So we haven't really touched on this, but as soon as the war in Ukraine started, a lot of citizens in Poland especially went to renewables, because that gave them the sense of control, and that gave them the sense of security. So that, I think, helps with the perception of the decarbonization as a source to energy security. I just wanted to add that we have missed that in discussion, I think.
Merci. Brigham, MCCOWN, vous voulez ajouter quelque chose?
Mr. MCCOWN, would you like to speak about that before giving the floor to the room?
Yes, you were being too kind, because France saved Spain for about 8 hours a couple of weeks ago, and has also pushed energy to Germany and to other places when their grids have not been quite ready to do so.
Merci. Il nous reste 3.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes left, so if you have any questions, please raise your hands. We have mics being handed out. A lot of questions, I see. Régis Baudouin, I would like to ask a question to all the panel. Electricity is more costly, much more costly in Europe than in US or China. How, in these circumstances, could we consider to decrease this price to favor reindustrialization? We've talked about refining of metals. This is very energy intense, energy consuming, and we'll need an affordable energy to do so. So I would like to listen to the panelists on that issue. Who wants to react? Xavier PIECHACYK, maybe? And then Brigham MCCOWN on the American front? There's an elephant in the room, which is called the carbon tariffication. Beyond this, there's a lever which is very efficient. It's taxation. We have a relative taxation between the oil, gas products and that of electricity that we could adjust to make electricity consumption more attractive. You're right in saying that there's a price difference. However, when we look at the costs of production in Europe, the production costs of electricity are quite weak, are quite low. So in Europe, we have a strong issue. The market functioning makes us closer to the costs. So, indeed, in Europe, we have taken our responsibility and we have applied carbon tariffication because we have climate commitments. And so we allocate to the production of energy coming from coal and gas in the form of tariffication, carbon tariffication. I think it's very healthy because it's not a matter of sovereignty issues that we have to manage, but it's also a matter of fighting against climate change issue. And we have to take our responsibilities in that subject.
This is a good introduction for my American neighbor. Very briefly, because we should have time for another question.
You know, and I can't get into it, but I would tell you free market reform and less regulation would be helpful.
Merci. Une dernière question. Enfin, parce...
Another question, because we have 20 seconds left. Is that all good? Yeah. Yann Carbo, thank you. My question is on the supply. You mentioned countries where the supply was anticipated or planned. You talk about Canada, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and Uzbekistan. These are countries which are in spheres of influence that are close to the US for Canada and Russia and China. So we should have a decrease of nuclear plants worldwide, so an increase of consumption of nuclear energy. Should there be a stress on demand, shouldn't we, French people, should we be sure to be well supplied enough? Nicolas, you can sleep tight, citizens. We won't be of shortage of uranium in France. If we take the case of uranium, 60% of uranium comes from Canada. It's under US influence, but US hasn't become an enemy. It's difficult to talk to them right now, but they're still an ally, fundamentally. Secondly, in the short run, this geological reality that I was talking about and this world redistribution is such that there will be alliances that will change, but there will be enough uranium. But over the longer term, it's a question, indeed, obviously. And this is why the nuclear parks wants to do recycling. I was talking about it's already a reality. 10% of nuclear electricity energy comes from recycled elements. And if we use more recycled, we could actually reach 20% over the years. And there's another stage we could reach where we could reach 40%. And the ideal world where we would close the cycles for the specialists of the cycle, we could reach 100% of recycling with all the elements that are already in existence. That's for the end of the century. 10% is for 2025, 25% is for 2030, 40% is for 2040, and 100% is for the end of the century. Thank you. That will be the takeaway message. Thank you to Nicolas MAES. Thank you to Brigham MCCOWN. Thank you to Xavier PIECHACYK. Thanks you to ORANO Pieton and Zofia MOYON.